So it's my privilege to have my parents with me today. We're still debating whether it's a privilege or not. I think they're wondering how in the world I convinced them to do this. So anything that you think about me and all the other shows you've watched or videos, it's because of them. It's because of the way you've raised me. So it's on you. So I don't know what to tell these people. So they're here in town visiting, and actually the first time we've actually really been able to see each other since COVID. So even we are being a little careful, distancing a little bit, to make sure that we're not getting anybody sick and all that stuff. Today we're going to talk a little bit about family, and obviously that's why I have my family here, but also kind of how family works in the first responder world, because my father was in the military for how many years total?
6 active and 19 reserve.
Right, so 25 of you retired as an E42. So I tell everybody, E10's the top, so I just keep adding a number to it every once in a while.
That's close.
Something like that. So retired as a senior master sergeant or senior master sergeant? Okay, so E8. All right, so I got my tattoo correct, by the way. It took me a little while to make sure I had it right, but it is actually E8, so we get that right. It was a little bit of a debate, so it would have been a little bit of a bummer if I had the wrong one. But obviously because of that, I was born in Alaska, because you guys were in Elmendorf Air Force Base, and so I've had a little bit of experience with it, and obviously since then we've taught a lot about first responders and how the military works, but what we want to do is talk to you all about kind of through your lifetime, the experiences you had with the military, some good, some bad, but also how some of that applies over to other first responder world, police officers, firefighters, and of that nature. So we're going to ask you some questions. I promise they'll be easy. All right, nothing surprising. So if you guys can just talk a little bit about where you're from, how you met, which is a great story, and then how you it's on video, don't forget, and then also kind of how that transition happened in the military, because yours is a very unique story. It kind of happened in the middle of the beginning of your relationship. So go ahead.
Well,
You better take control here, Mom.
yeah, I better.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the story might get too much.
Yeah.
We met at a caroling party at our church in 1968.
69.
69.
Oh, wow.
Close. And then we got married in 1971, November. We both grew up in rural Kansas, in the wheat field country. And we went from there.
Happily married ever since.
Not a bad day since, right?
Not a bad day
That's right.
But you guys, when did you join the military?
Vietnam, 1970. Had a low draft number, and I'd fallen in love with the Air Force, so enlisted.
And now Grandpa, your dad, was in the Army. I believe he had some pretty strong words about you not joining the Army, something along those lines.
Yeah.
No
Army, no Marines.
Yeah. So obviously you chose to do that, and then you so that was 70, you said?
1970.
So then when did you guys get married? 71. And so how did that all work? Because you were in the military while you were dating, and I'm sure that was very easy.
Had to talk her mother into allowing her to marry me.
Well, it's understandable. So.
It's another story.
Yeah. Something about robbing the cradle.
There you go.
Yeah. No, he left for basic training, and I was still in high school, and then we went from there. When we got married in November, I stayed back and was in some nurses training, licensed practical nurses training. So we got married, had a very short honeymoon, and then he went back to Tinker Air Force Base.
In Oklahoma?
In Oklahoma. And then we actually didn't get back together where we lived in the same place until February of 1972.
Okay. Right.
So,
And then when did you go to Alaska?
May of 73.
Okay, so you guys were in Oklahoma together for a little over a year, and then okay. So then, what was your job in the military?
Aerial Port Squadron, air freight,
Okay.
for 6 years. Last 3 was as a load planner. And then the 14-year break in service back in 90, went to the reserves. And all of has pretty much the same, but they shut us down because they closed the base in Kansas City, Richards-Cabower. And went to Whiteman Air Force Base and cross-trained into admin just because I knew that I could take that anywhere.
Yeah.
And with logistics, you're limited, so.
And then you ended up in Fort Belvoir, a little bit of Pentagon before that.
And then Pentagon was 2 months and I wanted out.
And didn't you say if you don't rank high enough, you just carry coffee around for people or something like that?
Yeah, I mean.
Because then that's one of those things where, as a family member, you're like, he's going to the Pentagon, and within a month, you're like, I've got to get out of here. I'm like, whoa. Like, all I'm doing is just carrying coffee with people because everybody has huge ranks and you can't do anything else. And you said DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, Fort Belvoir.
Yeah.
So you basically were in Alaska. You didn't go over into combat, but you took Mom with you, and then Jared and I were both born in Alaska, and then you came out.
Right.
So there's, I guess the first question for you would be, as a military spouse, with somebody who's active duty but not deployed, there's still some struggles that come from that, right? There's still some issues that come up with having to deal with someone who's doing a job like that, I would guess.
Yes, there. Well, because we were based in Elmendorf, in Anchorage, Alaska, we were still a long ways from home. Mm-hmm. And just a couple of months after we got there, we found out that we were pregnant with you. So back then, in the 70s, it was still 1,200 miles of gravel to drive the Alcan Highway. Mm-hmm. So nobody in our family was going to be able to do that, and it was just cost prohibitive to fly to Anchorage. So we did everything without any family around. Mm-hmm. So your military people become your family when you're that far away from home. When Dad got his orders, it was one of those things where we got the call. I remember it was, I believe, on a Saturday morning, and I could tell he was going to tell me that he had gotten orders. And I just was holding my breath that it was going to not be Vietnam.
Yeah. And
he came into the room and he told me that there were 10, I believe, sets of orders, and 8 of the orders were for Vietnam. And he and another guy, because they had put on their wish list Alaska, got Alaska. But he had to extend 18 months? You had to extend. Yeah, it was an unaccompanied tour.
And I wanted to take Rita with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to extend 2 more years.
Yeah.
And
which is why you did 6 instead of 4.
Right.
Okay.
So that's how we ended up.
And I think that's where a lot of the correlation comes with first responder families is it's a very similar feeling sometimes when the family of the first responders kind of becomes a little bit of your families. I mean, even here in Florida, a lot of us down here, our families are away. You guys are in D.C. Chrissy's family is up in Pennsylvania. There's not immediate family here, so that kind of is what happens as you go through. Now we're at a little different stage of life now, but I see a lot of these men and women who are having newborns, and obviously travel a little easier now than it used to be, but you still end up relying on that first responder family. They become your experts in who's the best attorney, who's the best accountant, who's the best plumber, who's the best whatever. And that's kind of what, I think that's where there's a little bit of a correlation. And I know that obviously there's a fear of the deployment to a battlefield as well, obviously, so that was alleviated during that time. I think it's important for everybody to understand, like, these families come together and join, they become part of your life. But what happened for you guys is then you decided to get out. You decided to not go in the career military, right, and decided to do something else, which was teaching. Right? So we'll kind of fast forward through that because I would love to talk to you guys about it, but I'm sure the people in the video are like, okay, teacher, that's great. And then at some point, I think you were about 38 at the time when you decided to jump back in.
40.
Oh, you were 40, okay. I know 35 was the number to go back in as an officer. And I think it was 35, so I know you were above that. So you went back in at the age of 40 to back into the military and into reservist. Right. There in Kansas. And Kansas City, we were talking about Richard Sabauer a little bit in Whiteman. So how was that discussion for the two of you? Was that something that you were like, yeah, sure, go ahead?
No.
I didn't think so. So
no.
I've never heard this, so I just wanted to hear this story.
Well, I was not in favor of it.
Yeah, well, I talked to my dad, and he thought it was a good idea. Talked to my pastor, and he thought it was a good idea. And that was it was exactly the time when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait.
Yep.
So I walked into the squadron, and the first shirt was like, I have only one question for you. Are you ready to deploy? I'm like, well, hello. Glad to meet you. I said, yes. And a lot of people weren't.
Yeah.
They had that's what, they're not there for that, so.
So Mom, what was your response when you found out you wanted to go back in?
Oh, I didn't like it. I was not happy about it, especially because of what was happening right then.
Yeah.
And I believe it was just like
You haven't told me.
2 weeks, 2 weeks after you got back in was when President Bush sent off all the bombs and stuff over there. It
Yeah,
started
that's right.
everything.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, here we go.
Okay.
Here we go again.
You avoided the deployment the first time. You
Yeah,
avoided
and I
avoided
just
combat,
knew-
and now you're.
Yeah. And a lot of people did get deployed around you. People around him did get deployed. So yeah, I was very nervous about that. And you boys were teenagers,
Yeah.
by then. So, yeah, it's fearful because you don't know what's going to happen. So
So that was 1990, 1989, 90, somewhere in that area?
1990.
Yeah. So I remember as a high school kid just being like, oh, cool, Dad's going to reserve. Because you don't know. I mean, I think that's another thing to point out, too, is that a lot of times spouses, significant others are very much in tune with what's happening in the world, what's happening. The kids don't know. They don't know everything. Now, they're keenly aware of things we don't realize sometimes. But I know as a kid, back then, I didn't know. Reserve just meant, oh, he's in every weekend, 1 weekend a month, he's going to do this, and then 2 weeks every summer. Well, I remember going actually with you a couple times on a weekend just to kind of see what you do and kind of be a part of that. But never crossed my mind that you'd be deployed. I'm like, my dad's old, still younger than I am right now, obviously. So now it doesn't seem so old. But I think back at the time, I'm thinking, they're not going to send my dad. He's too old to go do that. And so you were at reserves for a while. You went Whiteman. You went out there. One of the things you did during that time I thought was really interesting. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about is family readiness. And if you could just describe what family readiness is, what it's supposed to be, and then kind of how that plays into the families of people being deployed.
I got into family readiness when I became the senior enlisted advisor at DLA for Air Force colonel at the time. That's a different world than a straight reserve unit. It was a joint command. You have people from all branches working together, and we deploy together, maybe. Or we may go one. I was the only one of 2 Air Force guys that deployed with like 9 or 10 Navy guys. And we were piecemealed out. We didn't deploy together as a unit. Like an Air Force squadron or an Army squadron will deploy as a unit. They will run, and they're all friends. They know each other.
Mm.
And in my case, we didn't. We were out there by ourselves, and that's a little bit different.
So what are the challenges that come from that for you in that role, going out there with people you don't know and doing this job?
For me, it wasn't a big deal, but for the spouse back at home, her support group may or may not be there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a unit, if you like Fort Belvoir, the wives, and there's somebody there that can make sure everybody's okay.
I got you.
And Mom had nobody.
Yeah.
She would have been. The church was where she got her support.
So now you would go for how long at a time?
We went 6 months at a time.
Okay.
But I served with some Army folks that were 12-month and maybe extended to 15, and in some cases 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
They got to go home for a week or 2 midway through. But a unit, when a unit deploys, they have support back home.
Yeah.
But a reserve may or may not.
And that brings us back to some of the things that take place. We talk about the differences between firefighters and cops for one. For all my cop friends out there, everybody likes us. It's a whole other conversation, but they used to be funnier than it is now. But I talk to my cop friends and I say, you don't have anybody in that group with you. You're in your own car. Most of the time you're in your own car. My friend Sam works here locally, and if he runs a bad call, he gets back in his car and he goes to the next thing. Firefighters have groups. We're in a truck with other people, at least one, normally 2 other people, then you get back to your station and it's typically another truck or two. So you can have 5 to 15 people at one station who can sit and banter and shoot the breeze and talk and just discuss things and kind of have your own little therapy session. That's an important part for, I think, special forces. They talk about that a lot. Units that deploy together, things like that. In the actual role of family readiness, when you were doing that part of it, and you helped talk to families before their significant others about to be deployed, what did you guys do? What were some of the things you talked about?
Well, I would travel to a reserve unit attached to DLA, basically, and this was when Iraqi freedom kicked up, and a lot of guys did not know. I mean, you got to go through legal. You got to go. I mean, your wills, your power of attorney. Who's going to pay the rent? Who's going to make the car? I mean, all that stuff has to be set up.
Yeah.
In my case, I didn't because Mom took care of it. So
she's already doing all that stuff.
I'm gone. Goodbye.
See ya.
But sometimes in all that, just daily life, you've got to make sure that all the bases are covered. But beyond that, there's a lot of stuff you got to do. I mean, you got new issues of uniforms, you know, your weapons, your firing range, all that stuff. It was just basically a reminder that you need to be cognizant of this is what you're going to have to do,
Mm-hmm.
because, and the phrase at the time was, if you haven't deployed, you will.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a lot of people. That's why I deployed, because they ran out of people.
Yeah. Well, and we're gonna get don't give away the rest of the video. We're gonna get to that in a little bit. So, you talk about the fact that these families had to figure out what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what to expect, but a lot of times the military personnel, these men and women didn't know what to do either. A lot of people are just, because they're in the reserves, a lot of them are doing it for a GI Bill. They're doing it just to stay active. They're doing it to get some retirement points. There's a lot of reasons for it, and a lot of them don't have any idea they might actually, like you said, deploy. So when they go get deployed, or even if they are ready, they don't think about the little things. And these are the things I call the kind of idiosyncrasies that happen even for firefighters and cops. It's those everyday things. We joke a lot about the fact that for a firefighter or a cop, everything goes wrong at home the day you're not there. Mm-hmm. Something floods, or an appliance breaks. One of the kids, gets stitches. It always seems to happen on the day you're on shift. It can't happen when you're home, which I say is because we're amazing at home, so none of that stuff ever happens. But a whole other conversation about that. It's just all those little things, and then you start thinking about there's that sense of invincibility as well, because when you wear the uniform, you think I'm untouchable. I won't. And so that thought of, I can't believe how many first responders I talk to who don't have a basic life insurance policy other than whatever the department provides. They don't have a will. They don't have a plan for what would happen if something was. You're running into a burning building possibly today. You're carrying a gun towards somebody who may want to kill you today, and you don't have the basic information. And the basic conversation should have already happened. Basic legal documents should be done. But that goes into the psyche of the first responder, which is, I'm okay. Like you have SEALs, special ops people who are going over there and don't even have some of that stuff taken care of because they're like, I'm good. No, you're not invincible, just like none of us are. But it's even more, a little higher degree of that for us. And that goes back to the mental health thing we talk about here all the time, which is when we feel invincible, it's hard to admit when you have a problem. It's hard to admit there's something going on. I deal with first responders all the time who won't even admit they have a torn ligament somewhere because they don't want anybody to know that they're weak, so they're just going to keep fighting through it. Much less admit there's something mentally or emotionally going on with you. It's a great illustration of that with the military, but also those little inane, stupid little things like paperwork, the things that happen. It reminds us also that we have the same basic stress that everybody else has. Military, police, fire, EMS, healthcare, all of these people are humans. They all have everyday stress. They have traffic stress. They have financial stress. They have burdens at home, they have family, they have all these different things. Plus, then for the time they're there, they have that as well. And one of the things we make the illustration about with the difference between military and first responders is the first responder has a lifetime, a career of exposure to really difficult things. The military person typically does not. The military person has whatever their deployment period is. You talked earlier, 6 months down. But in that 6 months, depending on what they're doing, if they're a Marine knocking down doors, they're seeing some bad stuff for 6 months. And they're seeing a lifetime of bad stuff. And I think that for us as first responders who are dealing with military, a lot of times coming into our service, be aware of those people who have had that experience. We have a lot of former military who are part of our department now. And I've talked to many of them who struggle daily. I talked to one guy who he was with us, he was in reserves, he got deployed, went over and did some really, really bad stuff, had killed quite a few people, saw a lot of death, came back, and then like a month later is going to be on the street, EMS, fire. He goes, Jeremy, I can't drive down the road without checking my 6. He had been back at the time for 6 months and was still so hyper aware and hyper focused on everything because of what he'd been trained for over there. We had another guy who was on his like 3rd deployment, came back and we were training on our EKG machine, and he's doing something. They're like, he's getting all his training done and getting ready to get back on the field, and they're like, so you run this call, so show me on the machine what you do, on the monitor what you do. And he goes, he nailed everything. He's nailing the protocol, and then he goes, he can't remember which dial to dial. He looks at me and I go, it's okay, we'll get back to it. He goes, no, you don't understand. Give me my M16, my assault rifle, and I can be blindfolded and take that thing apart, put it back together 5 times in the next 10 minutes. But I can't remember which button to push on this thing. It's that different mindset that a lot of these men and women come back with because of the combat they're facing. And I think we sometimes forget about that. But we also need to understand that even just the isolation that comes from not being with family, not being with support systems is part of it. So I wanted to ask you the question. You got deployed, and I wanted to tell a little bit of this story. I remember you sitting down with the entire family, all of us, and it was the summer before. You guys remember this because he's like, this is literally what he said. Hey, you guys know I'm in the reserves, and there's always a possibility in the reserves you could be called upon, and well, it's my turn. They came in the other day and told us that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we're all kind of sitting there, and he goes, so just want to let you know, probably by next summer I'll be deployed. And I go, where? Probably Iraq. And I said, how many people vote Grandpa gets out of the military today? And we all went, yep, out of the military. And the comment you made on that, I don't know if you remember saying it, but you said, you're like, it's my duty, it's my turn, I'm up. My number got called, it's time for me to go. And I was like, why do you have to be a patriot? And I think Mom made the same comment. Why do we have to love this country so much? Right? I mean, it was a frustrating thing for us because we're like, at the time you were 58 when we were having that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we were like, come on, it's time to get out. How many people in your reserve unit retired when they found out it was either retire or go?
I don't know.
It was a few.
Yeah.
I remember you commented there were a couple of guys and there were only a few that left and a few that stayed. Not to say they did anything wrong either, but kind of that same stage of life, like, okay, it's not my turn to go, I'm done. And you made that decision to go. And I remember we were all proud of you for going, but we weren't happy about you being gone either. And we'll talk about kind of the family part of that in a moment. But you weren't going in, obviously you carried a gun, but you weren't going in on the front lines, knocking doors down and going door to door. You had a very, very different job. And you talked a little bit to me one time about your training, about the fact they told you, here's your convoy training, you don't get in one. Wasn't that kind of the idea?
Yeah.
Because you were too high ranking?
No, they didn't. Nobody from DLA.
That's what it was,
DLA.
DLA.
Like, no.
Yeah, that's not part of your job. So obviously, when you got deployed, you're 58 years old or 59. I think you turned 59 during that year, but you're 58 years old, and you're not being deployed as the guy knocking down doors or going door to door. You're actually in a very safe position, relatively speaking.
Yes.
It still has to be a little bit traumatic. So just talk about what it was like to training, getting over there, kind of just the emotional, mental gymnastics that it was, I guess, maybe?
I didn't think I was gonna, I was gonna be safe.
Yeah.
there was no, I mean, you're in a wire and compound, there's guards, I mean.
Yeah, but I've seen 13 hours. I know how that works. They come in, they're all over. They shoot grenades and. So what's the difference in the training now as opposed to before? Like, I know you said you guys shot tons of bullets before. Now they shot didn't you shoot like air or didn't you shoot simulated?
Simulated.
Yeah.
And going, yeah.
So you went from shooting thousands of rounds to simulated rounds.
I've never, as an Air Force person,
There it
shot
is.
thousands.
There it is. I'm trying to help you out. I'm trying to help you.
5 or 6 maybe.
So the other
Can he hit the target?
the other military people shot thousands of rounds.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yes.
And it all comes out. Is this why you guys have the pink bathrooms? Is that the joke that always comes out?
I don't.
Can't pick on the Air Force right now, right? Okay. So I know when you got there, you get into you were at Anaconda, was it? Or?
Anaconda, LSA Anaconda, Balad Air Force Base.
Okay.
Balad
So sirens go off. What do you have to do? Like or air raid or what? Not an air raid. What's the term? If there was like a bomb coming in or there was a bomb scare.
We were in one mortar attack, 2 mortars, but you don't know you're in one until they hit. And then it's over.
So there's no time to prepare?
No.
Oh, there's one. So it wasn't one of the places you stayed at called Rita?
That was Balad.
And you only had 2 the whole time you were there?
Yes.
This is such a joke. I was worried about you for nothing.
No. Tell people.
So you came back. I remember you came back. One of the things you said was that more than anything else, your feet hurt because it was just constant gravel, constant just. It was that.
I swore I would never walk on gravel again.
Yeah, exactly. Remember that. Well, so Mom, talk about what it was like for you. Not very different situation because normally a military person is deployed and then the spouse is home with the kids, with the family, and you had grandkids. I mean, we were all gone. So what was, besides being angry with him, what else, how did you feel?
That's good. Well, first of all, he didn't tell you some of the things that he did that
there you go.
made me nervous.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah. He flew from like FOB to FOB.
What's FOB stand for?
Forward Operating Base.
Just want to make sure they understood.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Let her speak. Let us
He flew from from one of those to another.
Yeah.
And then the lobbing of, they would lob the whatever those
the
things
mortars,
were over, into where the guys were staying, and you would hear about those things happening here stateside.
Mm-hmm.
I would hear that on the news, and not knowing really where he was at the time because he was moving around a little bit.
I didn't know where I was.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that made me the most nervous was knowing that he was, and there was a time or two that they kind of had to move the plane to a different area, like in flight, because they knew that they were possibly going to be shot at or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know all the terms.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that made me nervous, because it's like, okay, I know he's going from FOB to FOB in helicopters and whatever, and you hear
anything
things.
can happen.
Yeah, anything can happen. And so that was the type of thing that worried me the most. I knew he wasn't in combat per se, and that he was inside the red line, is that what they called it? What they call it? The wire. Inside the wire.
Red line,
Yeah,
wire,
red line, wire.
green.
There's a red line in the sand.
You can't come past that red line.
Inside the wire.
Enemy.
I knew he was inside the wire,
Yeah.
so he was supposed to be safe.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that concerned me the most was if something happened, I couldn't get to him.
Yeah.
That's what bothered me the most.
Well, and even the communication's hard. I mean,
the communication's
I
awful.
only talked to Dad one time. You're deployed how long?
6 months.
6 months plus with your pre. It was basically ended up being about 7 or 8 total, wasn't it? With like
About
training
9 months total with training and everything.
Yeah.
And I remember during the 6 months, I talked to you on Father's Day. I don't never forget. We spoke one time just because it was. I mean, I know that communications changed in the last 12, 13 years, but it was very difficult to even be able to. I remember we sent a few care packages, but it felt like we were in the dark ages. It just felt very difficult to discuss.
And they made it sound like it wasn't going to be.
Yes.
So that was a real frustration
Yes.
for me, because I was under the impression that Dad would be able to call me, that we, you know, the email was gonna be, we could put it on, you know, he could have a Facebook account, I could keep, you know, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And even when he was able to call, a lot of times there would be time limits, or the connection would be bad, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, that
So
was
he
frustrating.
called you and not me? I got it, okay. Good
I think he only called maybe twice, 3 times, I don't remember. It wasn't very often,
Yeah.
it was usually emails
Yeah.
or whatever. But even the phone calls were very, very brief.
Well, even the emails, like, he'd send pictures, are really cool, but the pictures were so grainy because he couldn't even, the quality couldn't even get the quality we needed, so that even I tried to look at the picture, I'm like, I think that's Dad. It was really bizarre, and I know that one of the other things that I found out later was that you were actually working with some of the Iraqi people, some of the Iraqi nationals who were, I guess, sympathetic to what we were doing, and were doing work with the. But I remember even as a young adult going, whoa, hold on, which Iraqi people are you working with? It's like, well, I'm like, I needed to know because I've watched the shows, I've watched the same things, like that. They're pretending to like you, but they don't like you, and then because I know you guys, you know, they're buying things from you and they're doing that stuff, but all of that happens, and I think it's a great analogy, which is why we're having this conversation, back to first responder world. Because yes, we're only gone for 24 hours or 12 hours, whatever the time be, but we know our environment. Like, I can just watch the two of you right now, and it would have been great if we had like an EEG or ECG on you, just evaluating, because he's like, I was gonna be fine. It was good. I was gonna say, and you're going, are you kidding me? We're still having this conversation all these years later. I can see it in your face, right? Like, it's like 12 years later, and I'm like, you still thought you were fine. You were not fine. Because that's very typical, because I know even for me, there are moments, I mean, Christy doesn't know exactly what I do, but she can even go by the station and see the station. She can see my bunk area where I sleep. She can come by at any point, we can grab something to eat. But it's still my world for 24 hours, and I know everything that goes on there. So when I come back after 24 hours and I'm a little off, just a little, something's not quite right, she doesn't know why. Because I've experienced, and it could just be that I was up like 6 times during the night because of tones going off, and I may not even run a call, but it just messed with my head and messed with where I was, and I'm not got back to my normal routine. Being gone for that long, that's even more magnified. I know he looked really good when he came back. So he had his head all shaved, he had the sunglasses, he was looking all tough and buff, and so
I like it better with hair.
Yeah, I know. but what was the transition like coming back? What was for you, Mom, when he came back to the States? What were the issues? What were the things that you guys discussed or faced?
We discussed quite a bit of, you know, like, he told me things that he wouldn't have told me till he got back.
Yeah, like what?
Well, like what were those maneuvers called? Evasive maneuvers? Is what
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he told me about, actually kind of accidentally one night mentioned something about an evasive maneuver at one point. I think he was actually talking to Brad Lepiska.
Oh,
I don't remember, but anyway.
And you're like, hey.
I'm going, so what's that?
What was
and
that?
so then when he explained it to me, it was like, so why did they do that? Well, because they had got some kind of communication that they thought there was enemy fire in the area, and I was like, okay, that's exactly why I was concerned. So that's the type of thing that kind of came out, those type of things came out after he got back, actually. So, for us, because I think you guys were older and out of the home, and it was just him and I, we didn't have a lot of the transition things that younger families do.
Yeah.
And your dad even made the comment, I remember a couple of times when we would talk, he'd say, he says, I'm the grandpa over here. He goes, there's not hardly anybody as old as me over here. So I don't think that we had the transition that some younger families do with like getting dad back into the family and mom having to kind of like maybe back off a little bit because she's been doing everything and maybe dad does it differently. So we didn't have those kind of things going on.
Well, and you bring up a good point too. Brad Lepiska was, what branch was he in?
Marine.
He was a helicopter
Cobra pilot.
So he really is a tough dude, so we don't mess with him. But that is a great picture of, I can imagine that's probably exactly what happened. He went, oh, let me tell you what happened. Well, he can talk these terminology, these stories with the terminology, with the little phrases and with the mnemonics and with all the different abbreviations, and he gets it because he understands.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, okay, we can talk, and you're going, wait, what happened? Because the same thing happens with first responders. Even Sam, my buddy who's a PBSO officer, we can have conversations about calls and about, because he knows from his perspective, and we can have this conversation in the same language and understand what we're discussing using, except when they start talking 10 codes, I don't understand any of that stuff. But when we talk normal language, it's the same thing for spouses and significant others in this world here, where we go talk about our fire world, our police world, our military world, and it doesn't jive with the home world. It just doesn't jive. It's a different thing. That's another one of those pieces that's very, very similar in a more, yours is more crunched up over that 6 month period. Ours is every third day, every second day. What was the transition like for you coming back?
Just go back to teaching school.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to pick up any home responsibilities when I got back home.
Yeah.
Because she'd been doing it.
Right.
She'd been doing it all, she pays the bills, she keeps the finances. So
if you didn't drive the car, would you have to do anything at the house?
no.
Would you just be able to sit against your face against the window, just let her drive you?
Gladly.
Just checking. So mom's the real hero. Okay,
Yes.
we got to that part. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. So you finally made a decision to retire after you came back. So about a year after you returned, right?
Right.
Why did you do that? What was the decision? What was the thought behind it? Besides being old.
I turned 58 over there, and because I deployed 6 months, I would be able to retire 6 months before 60.
Okay.
So I was 58, and you know it's time to quit.
Yeah.
There comes a time, you just know.
So
Mine came in May of 09.
So let me ask you though, what's the sense of fulfillment or sense of accomplishment in the fact that you got deployed and did that combat tour?
Mom didn't want me to go. You know that.
I remember that, yeah.
And I said, honey, I have got to do this. And it was just, I had to do it.
Well, you talked about the fact that the military helped you with your bachelor's and your master's actually because of GI Bill money, and I remember you saying, not only that, but they're going to give me retirement, they're going all these other things they're going to do, and it's the sense of I'm an American citizen, I have the opportunity to go help.
I read stories about people in World War II that didn't get into combat and regretted it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you crazy. People shooting at you. But it's a feeling, I had to do it. I wanted to do it, and it would complete my military career, I don't know.
Well, and I think the other thing is that goes back to, once again, the cops and the firefighters we talk about is sometimes our spouses don't understand is, what do you mean you have to go do this? This is what I'm called to do. Now, I talk all the time about the fact that this isn't our identity. Your identity can't be wrapped up in the police force, in the fire department, in the military. It needs to be wrapped up in other stuff. Family, faith, things that are important. But there is something wrong with all of us. I mean, we understand it, right? There's something wrong with Sam. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with you, the fact that we want to go do this stuff. Because other people go, and there's something wrong when we look at each other too, because I go, I'll go in a burning building, but I ain't going to have people with guns pointed at me. And Sam goes, I'm not going in a burning building, that's stupid. And we're all going, I'm not going over to Iraq. And you're going, I'm not going in a burning building. We all kind of laugh at each other because we have this mentality. Now, part of that comes back to our training. 20 years ago, I would have told you, I'm never going in a burning building either. You guys know this. When I first brought it up, my mom went, you're going to do what? And I was going to ask you kind of the transition here is, so what is the difference between feeling that way about the military husband and then your son calling you and going, I'm going to be a paramedic firefighter?
She cares more about you.
We're aware of that. So.
I don't think there is any difference, actually.
Yeah.
The feeling is the same, because there's just the fear there.
So how do you balance that as a loved one?
I would say that you balance that in that my personal belief is God's not going to leave you here one more second, more or less than what's in his plan.
Yeah.
And so we could go anytime, anywhere. And if you choose the firefighter, or you choose the military, Sam chooses the police force, it's like, you just have to be willing to go with that.
And I know we've talked about the fact that you made the comment to me back then. You said, I know that I could lose you in a car accident driving to work.
Exactly.
And I remember going, well, that's kind of morbid. And I remember thinking, well, but you often will ask about Sam. You'll ask about Garrett, my buddy at the city of West Palm. You'll ask about, because you understand that feeling that other people don't get. Oh, those are the heroes. Those are the people that do. Well, you're going, no, those are people who do jobs. And I know even
People
during
with
this,
families.
even during this COVID time, we've talked a lot about that as well. That there's so much more pressure and strain. And we've talked with Sam about the fact that even during the tension with the police now, there's so much more strain and stress. And so we all have to adjust to each of these pieces, but we all know we're doing what we're supposed to be doing at the same time. It's such an important topic. And I think part of the reason for us doing this videos like this is because it allows us to talk about this and kind of capture it from a family perspective. It allows you all out there to see the person who's teaching you these things to go, hey, we had the same conversation. I remember the strain and stress of, I'll never forget when Dad was getting ready to leave. It was the last time I was going to see him before he left, and I remember how long I hugged him. He finally was like, okay. I remember he's like, and I'm holding on. And I made the commitment I wasn't going to eat any, I like potato chips, I wasn't going to eat any chips the entire time he was gone. I gained more weight in those 8 months, by the way, than any other time because I just ate everything else in sight. But I remember thinking I just want to be able to remember to pray for him every day. So every time I want to have a chip, I'm just going to say a prayer. And it's kind of a silly thing, but those moments are real for everybody. So whether it's your 12-year-old daughter, your 40-year-old dad, your whoever it is, they all worry about you in a different way than you're prepared for. Mm-hmm. Because you see things differently than he does. You see things different than me. Christy sees things differently than I do. Now, Christy's not worried about me because she knows I'm worth more dead than alive to her, but she also loves me and cares for me, right, babe? She's off camera. I promise she loves me. And they have different concerns and different fears than we do. And we have to, as first responders, begin these discussions. You don't have to pull a video out and have a conversation with your family. But you can ask these same questions we just asked, which is, hey, how does this make you feel? What does this look like to you? How do you cope with it? How do you handle it? And whether it's turning to faith, praying about it, whether it's meditating, whether it's finding something to distract you, whether it's asking more questions to see what's going on, we have to start these conversations because it allows us to be better family units, which allows us to be better firefighters and cops and military people. Is there anything you'd like to add as we kind of wrap this up? Any thoughts that we came to that, I mean, I know I narrated it and led it beautifully, so we probably hit everything, but they also taught me my humility as well.
As a reservist, you probably are in a community that there's no other military in it,
Yeah.
possibly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm Kansas, small towns, and so when you deploy, your spouse is literally all alone, militarily.
Yeah.
So her family and friends would step in, hopefully, but that's... And I deployed with some Army guys that were on second and third divorces.
Wow.
It's just...
And second and third and fourth deployments too. So.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a lot like those small departments, the small cities with those police and fire who are really out there on their own. I mean, they don't have the support and resources that, like a place like Sam and I have amazing resources and support from our people. We have to be looking out for each other. So, well, thank you for joining us. Was that horrible? Did you guys make it through? Are you okay?
It was pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing the stories. Thank you for serving our country. Thank you for letting him serve our country and supporting him. And thank you for supporting me as a firefighter. So, appreciate it.
We do support you, and we support Sam, wherever he is.
Wherever he is, yep. I think he's behind the camera. Thank you all for joining us. If you ever need any support or resources for mental health, chaplaincy, anything along the lines of the first responder world, the Collaborative does a great job supporting these things. We'd love to thank the Cigna team for their grant that allows the Collaborative to record things like this, to give resources to our local departments. If you're a first responder in the state of Florida or really anywhere in the United States, please reach out if we can help you. Thank you.